We're very pleased to welcome the colleagues who are just joining us. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us from Berlin. We're very pleased to have you here. This first plenary focuses on the challenges and the importance of adapting peace-building strategies in response to new global power dynamics and the unprecedented strains that are being experienced by the multilateral system. We're very fortunate to have an esteemed, distinguished panel for this conversation. Ambassador Diki Potzel joins us virtually and is the Director General of Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peacebuilding, and Humanitarian Assistance at the German Foreign Office. Ambassador, we're delighted you're here. Rob Jenkins is the Assistant to the Administrator for the Bureau of Conflict Prevention and Stabilization at USAID. Rob, welcome. We're pleased to welcome Caroline Bronson, the Senior Manager in the Fragility, Conflict, and Violence Unit of the World Bank, which provides additional resources to the International Development Association countries that are facing different kinds of risks. And we're also delighted to welcome Awa Dabo, who is the Deputy Head of the UN Peacebuilding Support Office. Before that office, Awa held a number of senior positions within the United Nations, most recently as the Chief of Country Oversight and Support for UNDP's Regional Bureau in Africa. Awa, with your permission, we'd like to start the discussion with you. What we'll be doing is we'll ask each of our panelists a specific question, and then we'll have a round of questions that we hope everyone will answer, and we look forward to taking questions from the floor as well. Awa, your first question. As we know, the UN is one of the largest, most important entities responsible for maintaining peace and security across the globe. What concrete changes do you think, as a senior leader within the United Nations, including the department that you helped to lead, will make the UN better adapted to address today's threats?
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Liz. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great to be here. This is actually my first PeaceCon, so I'm really excited to hear from all of you. Before I joined the UN 23 years ago, I was actually working for civil society as well, based in London, but focused in Africa on human rights. So this is really wonderful. So let me try and answer the question, but I wanted to turn the questions the other way around, if you don't mind. Also because, in fact, I'm in another panel where I will talk a little bit more on the new agenda for peace, but I'll certainly make mention of it here today. But let me start by just talking about some of the global challenges I think we all collectively face. And I believe Liz also mentioned them earlier, which is to say that these challenges are not only about what the UN faces as far as the work we do, but it is challenges that we all as peace practitioners face and have to contend with in a world that's really changing fast and that's really increasingly complex. I would like to say that the first challenge that we all face is to be fit for purpose. To be fit for purpose to respond to the escalating number of fast-changing conflicts, the fast-changing nature of conflicts. I mean, today, right now, the world is facing the highest number of violent conflicts since 1945. Ukraine and Sudan, I've just added to a growing number of different types of conflicts, of active conflicts, of protracted conflicts, of conflicts that are affecting millions of lives and livelihoods the world over. To add to this complexity is another challenge, which is the nature of conflicts are changing. Peace actors are now faced with conflicts that take many forms, from the more insidious use of technology to sow conflicts and to escalate them, to the rapid growth of criminality and gangsterism, to community-level conflicts, to localized cross-border conflicts. These fast-changing, multifaceted conflicts require a new way of thinking. They require us as peace actors to reevaluate our strategies and our actions. They require new tools and modalities, and ones that can take into account these fast-evolving realities. This is a challenge for the UN, but it is for all of us as peace practitioners to be fit for purpose and to be able to respond adequately, effectively, and sustainably. A second challenge is what has been coined as the polycrisis that the world is facing. These are, in other words, the major stressors that serve to aggravate existing conflicts, that sow seeds of new conflicts, and that unravel hard-earned peace and development gains. The last few years have seen their fair share of these stresses, and we are all suffering the brunt of them. And sadly, as is often the case, it is the most vulnerable and the conflict-affected countries that continue to suffer the most. These stresses we know include, of course, the continuing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the skyrocketing food and energy costs that causing alarming food insecurity worldwide. I mean, it is sobering that recent WFP statistics estimates that 345.2 million people are projected to be food insecure in this year. That is double the number of 2020. That is sobering and that is scary. Not to mention the climate crisis, the threat of terrorism, the global pushback against human rights, which all of us, I'm sure, have known or witnessed, as well as pushback on gender equality and the unregulated development of dangerous technologies. Another challenge will be that we will, in the UN, will certainly face, and you will face, is the deficit in international solidarity that we are witnessing today. According to the OECD, socioeconomic grievances continue to be the core of the most violent conflicts, with 24% of the world's population living in fragile contexts. And yet, ODA, dedicated to peace in these countries, has declined by 19% in the past decade. We are seeing in our work at the UN, the trust between the global North and the global South is continually undermined by perceptions of unmet commitments and double standards. And yet, in all cases, prevention and peace building requires strong coherence across instruments of diplomacy, mediation, economic policies, and sustainable development. So given this fragile outlook and the rising needs, there is indeed an increasing demand for peace building resources, which is also another challenge. The demand is not that the demand we have is not met from the funding from the funding we are getting from our donor partners, nor is it sustained. Competing priorities at time of fiscal constraints threatens the provisions of necessary funding for building and sustaining peace. And this was recognized by the General Assembly in 2022 September with the GA resolution on finance for peace building that called to strengthen commitment for peace building, both financial and political. We are waiting to hear what the GA's response will be to our call, or the SG's call for assessed contribution for peace building. So across the background of these daunting challenges, we must continue to push and emphasize the centrality and the foundational nature of peace building and opportunities it offers as a catalyst for the broader 2030 agenda and the SDGs. Peace building is an immense opportunity. It is a fundamental pillar that cuts across the humanitarian development peace nexus to address systemic fragilities at the root of conflict. It requires people-centered, gender-responsive, and inclusive approaches. It is mutually reinforcing with sustainable development. So to get back to your point, Liz, on how are we working to ensure we are having responses that are practical and that are effective? Firstly, let me speak for the Department for Peacebuilding and Political Affairs, which is where I work, PBSO, Peacebuilding Support Office. And to say first, we have the new agenda for peace. The new agenda for peace will underline preventative action as a priority at all levels, and will make an appeal for greater international solidarity to tackle inequalities as key drivers of conflict, both within states and between states. By underpinning the call to leave no one behind, the new agenda for peace will be a marker on the road to the summit of the future and the broader 2030 agenda. The new agenda for peace will allow us to keep our eye on the ball on the SDGs, especially where progress is lagging in many fragile and conflict-affected countries. Sustainable development in particular is the route to prevention and peace. We know the development deficits drive grievances, they undermine institutions, and they allow polarization and violence to flourish. Secondly, we are hopeful that the new Agenda for Peace also offers opportunities for an enhanced peace-building commission, able to meet the increased expectations put on it. Strengthening the Peacebuilding Commission can allow it to exert significant leverage to support the UN's efforts in prevention and peacebuilding by bringing together and proactively consulting a wide range of actors within the UN, but beyond, including civil society, private sector, regional organizations, etc. With this, the PBC can help address some of the root causes and drivers of conflict and instability, and can foster coherence and effectiveness of UN action. And we are witnessing a growing appetite for the work of the PBC, and a recent engagement of the PBC with countries like Timor-Leste, Colombia, Mozambique, and Central Asia region has shown this. In addition, it's also important to note that the Peacebuilding Commission supports the Security Council by accompanying countries currently on the Council's agenda as they prepare the long road for sustaining peace. And in this regard, South-South Triangular Cooperation has also proven to be a great way to learn from each other's experiences. And just last week, the Peacebuilding Commission provided Colombia, my country, the Gambia, and Timor-Leste a platform to share their unique experiences in transitional justice with members of the Commission and other conflict-affected countries that are considered by the PBC. Thirdly, we continue to advocate for sustained and adequate funding for peacebuilding. This is also including increased funding to the SG's Peacebuilding Fund. We have seen that the PBF can be a powerful vehicle to advance our collective efforts to address global challenges. Such investments are key to not only addressing otherwise critical but unfunded actions, which are often root causes of conflict. They are catalytic to achieving the SDGs in fragile contexts. For example, since 2015, virtually all the PBF investments have contributed to the implementation of the SDG, of the SDGs, the 2030 Agenda. They offer the foundation for UN, for civil society, IFIs, and other actors to be able to build on and in support of the national priorities. These investments are catalytic. They're key to sustain support in peace-building interventions and in the long term. Fourthly, at DPPA PBSO, we work on our partnerships for effective prevention and peace building. We know we must do this. We must continue working and improving our partnerships with IFIs. We also know the critical role the civil society organizations have in peace building, particularly at local and community levels. At PBSO, we look forward to scaling up our partnership with civil society, including through an annual dialogue, the first of which is planned for October this year. We understand the importance of working with regional banks, with regional economic commissions, noting the increasing cross-border and regional character of conflicts and the important role these entities play. How much more time do I have? Am I run out of time? Yeah. So I do tend to talk too much. Maybe just two more points. I wanted to certainly make reference to, of course, the work that we do on the HDP Nexus, because very important, and particularly so in light of the scarcity of resources and the scale of needs that we have, and also the importance that we place on inclusivity, our leadership role in the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda and WPS as really all important catalysts for the new Agenda for Peace and ensuring that we can take this work forward. And lastly, let me make reference to an important point, which is on the point on data and results for peace building. We understand that demonstrable results and impact is important, not only for our donor partners, but importantly for the constituents that we are serving. And one good example of our planned work at DPPA is that we are developing a peace-building impact hub to deepen the understanding of how we assess, use, and share the impact of our peace-building interventions. So these are just a few examples of how we continue to strive to adapt. Reform and adaptation are by no means a once-off event. In the UN, it has been and continues to be a continual process. The next few months, with the publication of the new Agenda for Peace, leading to the Summit of the Future, will be key in securing commitments from member states and all stakeholders on these priorities. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Carolyn, the World Bank has been a leader in calling attention to the conditions that lead to instability and that lead to fragility, and in developing strategies for addressing these. The bank is also in the forefront right now of developing tools to help conflict-affected countries that have been hardest hit by a whole range of global shocks. We're hoping this morning that you can share how the bank is addressing these and what you hope for in the future to connect those to building peace.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this important event. Thanks to all of you for showing up this gray morning, and thanks to my distinguished co-panelists representing institutions with which we have very strong and deep partnership with. Let me, as mentioned, the multitude of crises, the multitude of challenges that we're facing in the world today has a huge impact on development trajectories, and for the ability to people to find their own socioeconomic opportunities and a better livelihood for themselves. So as some of you may know, we used to be thought of as the first ones to leave and the last ones to get back in times of crisis and conflict. But I hope you'd also agree with me that we have come as a World Bank a long way since that time. Let me just point to a couple of things that have changed the way that we have approached the topic within the World Bank. I would like to really highlight the Pathways for Peace, which we did in collaboration with the UN. This, for us, was really a pivotal report that allowed us, for those of us like myself within the bank who are very passionate about peace and stability, to really make a development case for conflict prevention, both in terms of preventing that it starts, preventing that it escalates, as well as preventing reemergence after the end of conflict. So it really allows us to make that strong business case for why, as a development institutions, this is such an important and pivotal topic for us to invest in. It was absolutely critical that we did it with the UN. As you all know, a lot of the core aspects related to peace and stability are within areas that we don't normally consider ourselves as the World Bank to be having the comparative advantage, i.e. on politics, on security, dealing with security actors, etc. So it's very important for us to do it with organizations that have that expertise and have that ability to engage on some of these aspects. So what happened after that? So one of the other key things was that we actually for the first time developed a World Bank strategy on fragility, conflict, and violence, which made the case for us continuing to engage and upping and strengthen our engagement on 4 different pillars. The first one was actually prevention of conflict and violence, so both in terms of armed conflict, but also vis-a-vis interpersonal violence. The second one was on how to remain engaged. Again, going back to this thing of being sort of the first ones to lead, right? What is the role of a development actor who thinks long-term in these sort of more humanitarian type contexts? What could we do? Thirdly, looking at how to transition out of fragility, conflict, and violence. What's the role of development in that case? And then finally, also looking at the spillover effects, not least forced displacement, where we saw a critical role for us to play in looking at some of the protracted crisis and the longer term impacts, as well as what we could do. So this has led to a number of things. We have, first of all, really tried to deepen our analytical understanding of what lies behind some of these conflicts, understanding the key drivers, as well as what are some of the sources of resilience that we can also, as a community, as development partners, help to build upon. And finally, really trying to get very granular, very specific in terms of recommendations for our fellow colleagues in the World Bank regarding both those who have the engagement, that leads a policy dialogue with governments, but also on the specific programming, how we do our operations. And not just in terms of what we do, but also how do we do it, with whom do we do it, where do we do it, etc., to think through how we can actually, through these quite significant amounts of development assistance, we could actually help support some of these trajectories and try to be supportive there. I want to highlight also that we have been looking quite a bit at our financing instruments. With IDA 19, we established what we call the Fragility, Conflict, and Violence envelope, which actually consists of 3 allocations that corresponds to those pillars. So both trying to provide more funding for prevention is unfortunately, and I'll get back to that point, prevention of escalation of conflict. So it's actually for those countries that are already seeing a certain element of insecurity. It's also how do we help ensure that we have a minimum of engagement in those that are still in conflict, in high intensity conflict. How can we look at the World Bank's ability to support institutional capacity as well as support human capital and try to prevent that from deteriorating? And finally, how do we support those countries where we see a window of opportunity, where we see an inflection point towards further stability and consolidation of peace gains? So this is actually quite a few $1 billion that we are over our different IDA cycle, 3-year cycles, are further investing in this, and to the World Bank going against our performance-based allocation, which is sort of core into our DNA. So actually quite a change in the way that we operate. So let me just highlight that it's something we're incredibly humble about. This is a huge endeavor. For the World Bank, it's also unlike the UN and many of the rest of you. This is sort of a new territory for us. And we are, of course, facing a number of challenges, not least due to our the country-based model that we have. We work with governments, right? And governments are often a key player in the stability and the conflict that ensue, right? So thinking through how do we work with them? How can we support champions within governments to help us advance on some of these agendas? We're also having a lot, as mentioned, sort of both the cross-border crisis, which challenged our country-based model, right, but also the poly crisis. In a world with so many competing priorities, how do we retain that focus on conflict prevention, on peace building, when we have COVID and climate change and debt sustainability and all the other things that are thrown at us? And I think it's something we're trying to very hard from our unit also to ensure that in the current review of the bank's model, which is trying to increase the focus on cross-border challenges, how does fragility, conflict, and violence play in here so that we can ensure that this big challenge is taken into account here? Let me just highlight a couple of things that we also took away from the Pathways for Peace report, and which I really want to highlight how it sort of guides the way that we think about this, right? First one is that as much as we would like to think as the international community, we can come in and change everything, at the end of the day, it's the countries themselves that have to drive these processes. Governments, civil society, the impetus and the driving force has to come from them. Right. So just to say that we can't set the sails, but we can try to blow into the sails, which is what we're trying to do with our increased engagement. Secondly, also just highlighting that it's also not development assistance alone. I think Afghanistan is probably one of those examples where it's really obvious it's not just a matter of pouring money into a country and we will have peace, right? It is really a matter of collaborating across diplomatic, humanitarian, development, security institutions to be able to advance this, again, following the impetus of the national actors in this. So I think I'll stop here, but just say that we are trying, and I hope also appreciate all the input from everybody here in terms of thinking more upstream. As mentioned, we are trying to do prevention where it's already started, but we all know that the further, as I guess from the health analogy, right, that the earlier you start on prevention, the bigger the impact, right? So how do we think through coming in too little and too late, but really think upstream, what is the role of our various advantages, our various competencies and expertise, where we can try to address these drivers of conflict much earlier on. Thank you.
Carolyn, thank you. Ambassador Potzel from Berlin. With the world facing so many multiple crises, Ambassador, and many more on the horizon, it's more important now than ever before to have fragility and stabilization champions. Countries that are prepared to use their resources and their leadership to implement lessons that we've learned from around the world. Germany is one of those champions. You're already a leader in stabilization and in fragility, and we're hoping that from the perspective of Berlin, you'll share with all of us today the lessons that you've learned and the things that Germany hopes will change as we rebuild our peace-building architecture.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit, elaborate a little bit about the stabilization efforts here in GFFO. And thank you also for the warm words extended to us. And let me start with an example, a concrete example. Accompanying Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock to Nigeria in December last year, it took us to the village of Ngaranam in Borno State. This village was destroyed completely by Boko Haram forces in 2015. The entire population had to flee to live in refugee camps. Now, stabilization efforts within the so-called Lake Chad Stabilization Facility under the leadership of UNDP brought together the Nigerian government, the local government, and also security forces and the affected communities to rebuild the village from scratch. They steered the process together. And now in October last year, the village reopened with houses designed to the needs of the people by a Nigerian artist, a school, a market, water tanks, a police station, people working as farmers once again. Local population is now returning, and we're talking of 3,000 people at the moment, are returning to the village. A mother of 6 children told us that the family now finally feels safe again. Her children can go to school, they have a house, food, and cattle. And they see the state authorities can deliver for the people. They can be trusted. And these are the successes that we want to achieve with our stabilization engagement. Now, over the last few years, crisis prevention and stabilization and peace building have therefore become key components of our foreign and security policy. Stabilization facilities, as the one I just mentioned, are indeed one of our favorite instruments. One early example of our effort has been the stabilization facility in Iraq, and you, Lise, have championed this endeavor in Iraq on the UN side. The task back then was support the government of Iraq to deliver security, basic services, and a sense of normalcy to the areas liberated from the Islamic State so that people would return to their homes, to Ramadi, to Mosul, and other places. To do this in a flexible and well-coordinated manner, integrated into a still ongoing military campaign against ISIS, was not an easy feature. But UNDP stabilization facility contributed immensely to this effort. The facility will close this year, at the end of this year, after 10 years in cooperation and over 100 million euros in German contribution since 2015. The facility completed over 3,000 projects, ranging from infrastructure rehabilitation over livelihood support to promoting social cohesion. It has helped more than 5 million displaced Iraqis to return to their homes. We look forward to the lessons learned, of course. The model has then been replicated to other contexts quite successfully, we feel, most recently the just mentioned Lake Chad region and Liptako-Gorma in Central Sahel. Now, what is very important, and Caroline just alluded to it and spoke to it, stabilization facilities put our partners' sovereignty and political needs front and center. They support the return of positive state presence, from security to basic services. And most importantly, it is the government that's doing it, and it is seen doing it. And not us, not the donors, and not UNDP, which is running the facility. So now last year in December, we published our first concept on stabilization with the headline, An Integrated Action for Peace. And why is it integrated? Because it's integrated, first and foremost, in our diplomacy, in our diplomatic efforts, It's integrated into multilateral and international coalitions, because as it was said before, we can't do this alone. And three, where relevant, it is also integrated into military engagement. And that means that what we are trying to do is really to work hand in hand with the other two Ds, development and defense. So challenges, of course, are ample. And I want just to name a few. And thank you for seeing us in a leading role here. But we really need to sit together and think about like how to tackle those challenges also together, because still more needs to be done. Coalitions need to be formed on different levels, not only internationally, but really also locally. We need to have all actors on board, i.e. the civil element, but also the military element to be successful. And we also need to enhance the cooperation between the humanitarian, the development and peace actors, the famous nexus, which was also already mentioned. If we get the nexus right, and we are really convinced, this only increases the impact we can have with our different engagements. Arguably, on the other hand, the biggest challenge arises in situations where we do not have a political partner in power who shares our values, or as a minimum, a reasonable degree of overlap of interests. Adaptability to developments on the ground and flexibility is really key in our stabilization efforts. That's why we look very closely at what is currently happening on the ground. And where we cannot cooperate with government partners, support to civil society actors and local self-governance are possible mechanisms. The second, or different challenge again, is resource mobilization. Germany is already one of the largest donors in the peace building and the stabilization space. My department alone spends about 500 million euros per year. The needs seem to be endless, but our pockets are not filled with money. So brief reflections on that. First, we have to become better at opening up and encouraging more peace-positive private investment in fragile states. Investing in extremely fragile contexts comes with high risks, we all know that, for investors, which makes investing less attractive, obviously. Plus, we need to make sure that new investments have positive impacts on ongoing peace processes. On this, we are already working very closely together with PBSO, and we are exploring innovative financing methods. We are curious how peace financing will be reflected in the new agenda for peace. And secondly, and I think that goes without saying, we need to become more effective in what we are doing. So there is still a lot of room for improvement, and to become better at knowing what works in which context should really be a priority for all of us. So happy to share more information if anybody's interested. And if you're interested in the concept that we published, just go to our website or reach out to me and I'll send it to you. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, thank you so much. Rob, the Biden administration recently took another step in the years-long adoption and implementation of the Global Fragility Act by sending to Congress the required 10-year horizon plans for the priority rollout countries, Papua New Guinea, Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, and then the region of coastal West Africa. This was a huge step forward. How is USAID going to change the way it works to better respond to the new risks of instability in these areas? And I know last year when you were with us, Rob, you shared very interesting reflections on what you hoped USAID would have done by the next PeaceCon. So in the spirit of transparency and accountability, we would be very interested in your own reflection on, did USAID get there?
Well, thank you, Lise. I have no memory of what I talked about last year. Just know there was no one out here. First, I want to thank you. I want to thank Liz. It's a great honor to be on this esteemed panel. Having a bit of imposter syndrome. You start with the guy who's been to space 4 times. These 3 wonderful, dynamic women A lot has been said. I hope to add something to the conversation. You're expecting me, everyone's expecting me to spend a lot of time talking about the Global Fragility Act, talk about the US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. This afternoon, there is a 3D diplomacy, defense, development fireside chat just on the Global Fragility Act. So I'll touch a little bit on it, but I'm not going to go into it too much right now. I'd like to just, first, no one's ever been fired quoting their boss. So last month, the administrator of USAID, Samantha Power, delivered her annual testimony on the budget when you have to do it in front of all 4 committees. And she went through the litany that we've all heard, and we all go through the poly crisis. Looking at it just a little bit differently, whether we knew it or not, the world was on a positive trend there for a while. Things were getting better. Poverty was going down. Malnutrition was going down. GDP was going up. Wow, things changed quickly. All these different shocks. You name the one that's the biggest. Khartoum's the latest. Think about it. 8 countries border Sudan. All of them have had conflict recently. That's a big part of Africa, which is a big part of the world. So we're losing on investments over 30 years. Democratic backsliding, misinformation. So the question is, can we do anything about it? I think Liz Hume is hiding over there. I don't know where she is, but she did say we should focus on a sense of hope. I don't know if any of these problems are solvable. I'm not sure if any problem involving humans is ever solvable. It evolves. So how do we mitigate? How do we manage? I'm not sure what the answer is. I know it's not going to be unidimensional. Lately, I've been over-focused on the fact that I think our industry, that being development, foreign affairs, foreign assistance industry, has become over-specialized. We've gone so technical that everyone's a specialist. No one's a general practitioner, standing back and looking holistically at what this society we're looking at, what this country, what this region needs. No, I'm looking at food security. I'm looking at child malnutrition. I'm looking at you name the X. Is it stabilization? Is it peace building? Is it prevention? Is it countering violent extremism? Why do we make all those little differences? Because in the field, you're going to be working locally, listening to local partners, and hopefully fixing whatever local problem is there and roll it back up. Underneath it all is governance, the thing we do least of, because you can't measure it. Those of you who know and had the honor of working with Andrew Natsios knows that his big thing was sometime in the 80s, in response to Congress, at least at USAID, we started to double down on those things that we could measure and prove we had an effect. Education, health, humanitarian assistance. I know if these children are starving and we give them what they need and they live, we can say we saved some lives. That doesn't work in the stabilization realm. That doesn't work in the governance realm. So we got out of that. So we're fixing the symptoms, and we're getting really good sometimes at fixing the symptoms. We're not fixing the cause, and that's hard. No amount of foreign assistance is going to do it. I can guarantee you not one donor is going to do it. No matter what we're going to do, it's going to take time. We're going to have to actually not just pay lip service to partnership, but real partnership. The ambassador talked about the different things that Germany is doing, and yes, Germany is a leader in this space right now. We are really proud, as part of the Global Fragility Act implementation, really proud to be partnering with Ambassador Potzel's team, my colleague Clemens, who works for her. You recently did a trip out to coastal West Africa together. And with IOM, I see Brian Kelly, a good friend and colleague here. Our government, USAID, and the German government have co-designed, will co-implement, co-manage a program in Togo, Benin, and Ghana Staff in the field working together every day, hoping to pull more donors in a few weeks at Stockholm at the Stabilization Leadership Forum. Working in the same mechanism, in the same place, co-managed together, co-funded with the governments, local and national, of those three countries. Is it going to work? I don't know. But it's practical. It's not just lip service to partnership. If we're going to be solving any of these things, or getting to anything that looks like solving, we're going to have to work together. That's hard for us in the US government. We like to roll in with an idea. We'd like to throw some money at it. We'd like to throw some people at it. And when we're a little bit shocked when it didn't work. We are trying to change our culture, which is one of the hardest things to change. It involves changing minds and changing behaviors. See, Rick Barton is here. I learned from him that behavioral change after age 40 is a very rare thing, he used to say. A lot of the people we're trying to change their mind and their behavior over age 40. We can get there. It's going to take a long time. I think one of the ways we got into where we are today, you mentioned Afghanistan, unrealistic expectations, hubris, a lack of humility, thinking, if we just try a little harder this year, we can solve this thing. We've got to step back. Look at the broader picture. How do we collectively pull together? Because we don't have enough money. We have a new policy framework at USAID, driving progress beyond programs, acknowledging it's not just the assistance and the programs. It's pulling people together. It's using that to leverage other people's assets, other ideas. That's where we're going to get anything that looks like success, working together. So I don't know if we are where I wanted us to be this year after last year. I will say we've done a lot of work in the US government trying to act differently, implementing the Global Fragility Act. There have been some milestones. There's a lot to show for it. But so far, that's all the bureaucratic boringness. Now, tune in later this afternoon. We'll talk about the challenges, what it really means to implement things differently in a new way. Thanks, Lise.
Rob, thank you so much. We have a few minutes left for this session, and we welcome questions and comments from the floor.
I didn't know we'd get questions from the floor. I wasn't prepared for that.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Thank you so much to a wonderful panel. I would like to touch on Mr. Jenkins and a couple other panelists talked about coordination and collaboration and what you're doing in each of your organizations towards that goal. I was wondering if maybe some of the panelists could speak to an entity within your organization that's more defense of the 3Ds, a security entity that you would like to work closer with in the coming year.
Sure. In the bureau that I have the honor of leading, our Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization, we have our Office of Civil Military Coordination and Cooperation, CMC. It's an entity dedicated to strengthening, fostering, building, leveraging the relationship between USAID and all manners of the Department of Defense across the spectrum of assistance, humanitarian assistance, transition assistance, development assistance. As part of implementing the Global Fragility Act, we, USAID, along with State Department and DoD, have created a secretariat, full-time, dedicated people, I see some of them are here today, who spend all day, every day, coordinating among the 3Ds. That doesn't sound very exciting. Thank you, Jody. He's the deputy of the coordinator of the secretariat. But for a bureaucrat, that's really exciting. It really is cool. I have spent my entire career trying to coordinate better with the Department of Defense and State Department. I have never, honestly, never seen it work as well as it's working right now. But remember, the Pentagon and all those combatant commands, that is a large beast. So we can coordinate all day long with pieces of it. The hard part is how do we use that coordination to leverage, I was going to say the battleship, but that's a little bit trite when you talk about DoD, that huge, massive enterprise that is DoD, and how do we leverage it the best? We'll never, ever get to the point where we go, we're done with coordination, we don't need any more of it. Everyone believes in coordination, no one wants to be coordinated. We are dedicating ourselves to real partnership among the 3Ds. And again, tune in this afternoon and you'll see just how exciting it is.
So I wasn't quite sure I quite got the question, but certainly just in a nutshell, well, so first to say that no, we do not coordinate with defense entities per se. But the question actually raised some thoughts in my mind, speaking specifically on this issue of peace and security and what it actually means for the work we do on peace building. The perception of the work the DPPA does in peace and security and peace building, and especially as we speak on the ATP nexus and the need to work in a much more collaborative fashion. I think it's just to say that it's a continuous challenge as far as coordination and collaboration, ensuring that in trying to push the centrality of peace building, how to ensure that we are speaking the kind of language that our humanitarian colleagues in the age understand. I mean, I think we've got it as far as development actors and peace building actors, but how do we speak with our humanitarian actors on peace building in a way that does not scare them when they hear the S? So certainly not when they hear the B, I'm sure they're running a mile, but certainly when they hear the S, because it is about humanitarian space. It's about this fear that we don't want to muddy the waters of what peace building is vis-a-vis the soft P. And this is one of the challenges as far as HDP nexus and what we do on peace building. On collaboration and coordination, just to say that, I mean, PBSO, I mean, the raison d'etre of Peace Building Support Office, it's about collaboration. It's a recognition that we don't do it alone. So in fact, everything we do, whether it's the Peace Building Fund, the Peace Building Commission, the work on strategy, it's about how do we work better with the UN system and other actors, civil society, IFIs, etc.
Maybe just real quick. So as some of you may know, we had a World Development Report back in 2011 that highlighted security, justice, and jobs as being the key elements towards peace. And sitting in an institution full of economists, that's a very difficult one to get across, to be honest. I think we have come also here quite a long way, not least through not necessarily like bilateral defense, but we have worked and seen increased collaboration with UN peacekeeping forces, for example, in those countries where those exist, to try to have that conversation where how does development and security interact. So in that sense, really trying to move beyond thinking of it as being, security being a non-productive sector, therefore any expenditures on that is unproductive and should be canceled, right? And saying, in the Gulf of Guinea right now, how can you not talk about security expenditures? And trying to think through how we as a development institution still work collaboratively and constructively on those issues.
Ambassador? Ambassador, mute.
No? Am I mute? No? Can you hear me now? Yeah, excellent. So maybe just two quick examples. First of all, we have what we call the Enable and Enhance initiative. And that actually means that a very close cooperation with our friends of the Defense Ministry, we have a joint budget. And we have to decide on where to put the money together. So, I mean, it's not the overall budget, but the budget for Enhance and Enable projects. So the defense guys, they look more on obviously the military side, on the equipment part and so on and so forth, whereas we look at training and other civil aspects of it. And obviously because of Ukraine, this budget has really grown a lot, but we're very happy that we have this close cooperation with the defense friends in the Defense Ministry. Secondly, the Interior Ministry has been gracious enough to second one of their very experienced police officers to this Directorate General. So he's working in one of the units here, and he is like the focal point for all the projects that we do in the security sector with regards to security sector reform, police training, and so on and so forth. So two, I think, very good examples of how we cooperate like on a daily basis with the different actors. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you. We're at the end of the session. We're going to ask our panelists one final question. The theme of this year's PeaceCon is new architecture for peace building in the world. If you were asked under duress to name the one thing that should be done to change the way we build peace globally, what would it be? Rob, we start with you.
I question the premise that we have a peace building architecture. That's the problem. Humanitarians do. Humanitarians have the cluster system. No joke about clusters necessary, but they have a system. They have sphere standards. They've agreed how they're supposed to do things. They know when something happens, how to come together. We don't have anything like that. I think it's time that we put that together.
Ambassador.
I find that a very tough call. Honestly speaking, well, if I pick one thing, but Caroline already alluded to it, I think really we need to get better in terms of ownership. We have to have leaders in the process that are actually from the particular region, from the particular area. I personally really also think that was also one of the major failures in with regards to Afghanistan, that we didn't manage to really have ownership from the government side there. So if you press, then this is what I would say.
Carolyn.
So under duress, I may also, again, question a little bit. Do we actually know what works? It's difficult to design architecture if we don't know what that architecture is supposed to be doing. It's something that we are struggling with, not least when it comes to prevention, where you're dealing with the counterfactual. Do we actually know what works? And I would doubt that. I do think that we have a lot of work ahead of us to get much better, much more granular, to figure out whether it's across the Ds or the cross nexus and whatever, right? Not least in how we put all that together into an architecture.
And the final colleague, Abu, who is the deputy of the UN's Peace Building Office. How would you answer the question?
Well, yes. So I want to tell you that we do at the UN indeed have a peace building architecture. It wouldn't be perfect, but we do have a peace building architecture. Yes, I do think that there's certainly room for improvement, and we recognize that, and we do hope we can improve what we have. The peace building architecture as it stands constitutes the Peace Building Commission, the Peace Building Fund, and the Peace Building Support Office, and we oversee all of that, including the work we do on strategy and partnerships with the bank. As far as what I could change, I think a powerful tool that we have, and I think we use, but we could use better, speaks to the issue of national ownership. It speaks to the issue of political will, because I completely agree. I say the same thing about Afghanistan when I speak to my continent, Africa. If it was money that was going to solve Africa's problems as far as conflict, we would have no problem. It is much more than that. It is about, of course, everything we're talking about here, working together, collaboration. But central to this is about will, political will. It's about ownership and will. And for me, the Peace Building Commission, a political body that we need to support, we need to build, we need to enhance, we need to make sure we are all part of it, that can help us to push together and push some of these strategies and objectives and goals that we collectively want to see in these countries. Thanks.
I hope everyone joins me in thanking